Russia is expanding its influence in Africa while the troika of North Korea, China and Russia are challenging a US-led world order. In the US, amid drama at the hearing of President Joe Biden's son, the judge made a surprise decision. Hello and a very warm welcome to World 360. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. We'll deep dive into our top stories, but first up are the headlines. North Korea showcases attack drones during show of unity with China and Russia at the Victory Day parade in Pyongyang to mark the 70th anniversary of the armistice. Russian President Vladimir Putin promises free grain supplies to 6 African nations as Moscow seeks to capitalize on the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal at the Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg. In an interview to CNN, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has refused to say if he would abide by any potential Supreme Court ruling striking down his controversial judicial reform law. And General Abdur Rahman Etichiani declares himself the new leader of Niger after a dramatic coup. From Mali in the west to Sudan in the east, a whole swathe of Africa is now run by the military. 7 months after his appointment, China dramatically sacked their foreign minister Qin Gang after his unexplained absence from public view since 25th of June. Now, apart from Qin Gang being absent, Gang's removal without any official reason being given for it has sparked even more speculation about what the story is actually behind the scenes. His role has been taken up by the Communist Party Foreign Affairs Chief Wang Yi, who interestingly was also Qin Gang's predecessor. 57-year-old Qin was one of China's youngest foreign ministers and a trusted aide of Chinese leader Xi Jinping, who was also responsible for Gang's rise in the ranks in China's government. What do these developments mean for the politics of China? Let's try and get in a sense of perspective. And for that, let me quickly bring in my guest. I'm joined in by Andrew K.P. Lung, who's an international and independent Chinese strategist. Many thanks to you, Andrew, for joining in. Now, not many in China have been convinced by health being given as the reason for removal of Qin Gang. What explains Gang's absence? And of course, the sudden reappointment of Wang Yi. Isn't the lack of an explanation opening more questions than providing answers?
Well, don't forget that Qin Gang was almost handpicked by President Xi, and he has been risen through the ranks very rapidly. And obviously, he has been a very capable diplomat. But recent events happened to suggest that he was involved in a extramarital relationship with the top anchor of the English channel. But what happened was much deeper in the sense that this lady was, according to social media reports, was suspected to be a double agent for the United States. Now, you can see that such a high-level diplomat, China's foreign minister, has been involved in this kind of relationship with a foreign spy. And obviously, it is very, very serious matter. And because there are still investigations going on, and you can see that there are the China's foreign ministry spokesman has been extremely non-committal because there are simply things are going on, and you just can't confirm it openly one way or another.
But that's how China has been so far. Many thanks to you, Andrew K.P. Lung, for joining in. Let's now shift focus over to North Korea. Delegations from China and Russia traveled to Pyongyang this week to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the end of the Korean War that ravaged the Korean peninsula. It's celebrated as Victory Day in North Korea. This seems to be shaking the US-led world order that has been witnessing multiple diplomatic uneasiness in the Korean peninsula. Here's a report.
After years of pandemic isolation, North Korea has invited its friends back this week for 70th anniversary commemorations of the Korean War. Satellite images reveal that Pyongyang's preparing a large-scale military parade in its capital, with the number 70 clearly visible. The visiting dignitaries, the first known foreign delegation since the COVID-19 pandemic began, include Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Images from Russia's defense ministry and North Korean media showed Shoigu being greeted by North Korean Defense Minister Kang Sun-nam at the airport and rows of North Korean and Russian troops. On Wednesday, Shoigu laid a wreath at a Korean War monument and called North Korea an important partner during talks in Pyongyang, adding that the two countries plan to strengthen defense cooperation. The United States has accused North Korea of providing weapons to Russia during the war in Ukraine, claims Pyongyang and Moscow have denied. But leader Kim Jong-un has vowed to bolster strategic cooperation between the nations. The visiting dignitaries who were announced on North Korean state television also include Chinese Communist Party Politburo member Lee Hong-jong. The visits come as Pyongyang looks to deepen its ties with Beijing and Moscow, finding common ground in their rivalries with Washington and the West.
All right, a senior journalist Fred Weir joins me live from Moscow. Thank you for joining in, Fred. Fred, let's try and get in a bird's eye view of these geopolitical developments. South Korea has garnered much larger show of international support for its armistice anniversary commemorations. 22 representatives are expected to attend from 22 countries. Now, at a time Russia is at war with Ukraine, a US soldier remains in custody of North Korea. US and China have been unable to reach a diplomatic breakthrough. How do you view the 70th armistice anniversary for Russia, China and North Korea in a US-led world order?
Of course, South Korea has more support. I mean, the United States is still the leader of the world. It is, you know, we talk and write a lot about how American influence is diminishing, and it is, but it's still the premier superpower in the world, and of course its allies are more numerous. When it says this is an occasion to celebrate, more people show up. That's nothing remarkable, but it is very remarkable that Russia and China showed up in Pyongyang this week, and that signals a hardening of lines in the world. It's also probably North Korea is going to start giving overt assistance to the Russians in their war in Ukraine. They have, like, by all accounts, vast stockpiles of Soviet standard ammunition and things that the Russians quite desperately need right now. So there's a practical side to it, as well as the immense symbolism that we're witnessing.
Right.
It's just one of those little milestones that show that how fast the world is changing.
All right. Many thanks to you, Fred, for sharing in your precious perspective. Now, the BRICS NSA meeting took place in South Africa's Johannesburg this week, and India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval put out a strong message against terrorism. He said that terrorism remains one of the key threats to national peace and security. Terror organizations in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region continue to operate with impunity. He mentioned that listing terrorists and their proxies under the UN counter-terrorism sanctions regime is an area on which BRICS can and should work together. Beyond this, NSA Doval also met with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi. According to the MEA, the NSA conveyed that the situation along the line of actual control since 2020 had eroded strategic trust between the two nations. In another development, India's Ministry of External Affairs has confirmed that Prime Minister Narendra Modi and China's President Xi Jinping held a discussion on border issues during their meeting at the G20 summit last year. The statement comes just days after the Chinese Foreign Ministry claimed that Xi and Modi had reached an important consensus on stabilizing bilateral ties during their interaction on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Bali last year. Interestingly, China made this claim soon after the meeting between NSA Ajit Doval and Chinese diplomat Wang Yi took place in Johannesburg. But Beijing continues to provoke. In the latest, India has pulled out of the World Universal Games. This after China did not stamp but stapled the visas of 3 Indian athletes from Arunachal Pradesh.
I should have clarified. That is my statement. So let me repeat again for clarification. During the Bali G20 summit last year, Prime Minister and President Xi Jinping, at the conclusion of the dinner hosted by the Indonesian President, exchanged courtesies and spoke of the need to stabilize our bilateral relations. So that's the statement I'm making. I think Foreign Secretary did mention, maybe he didn't mention the second part of it. He did talk about exchanging courtesies, and I think there was the general discussion or spoke of the need for stabilize our bilateral relationship or relations. And how we see that, I explained that I'm sure you would have picked up.
And with that, I shift focus over to the United States. The plea deal for United States President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, collapsed in a dramatic court hearing where the judge could not approve the agreements. The Republicans have been banking on Hunter Biden's tax troubles for years now. Hunter Biden's lawyers now have 2 weeks to get a new deal with the prosecution for the investigation that has now been going on for almost 5 years. In the plea deal announced last month, Biden was supposed to be charged with 2 misdemeanor counts for failing to pay his taxes on time in 2017 and 2018, which amounted to $1.1 million, the other one being $1.5 million. More importantly, Hunter Biden's he was deferring punishment for lying on a gun license application. The main dispute centered around how much immunity from future prosecution the plea deal would give Hunter Biden. But right now, that remains in a limbo.
I would call this extremely unusual. I have seen it happen before once or twice, and generally that's for one of two reasons. One is if there's just a term where the parties don't really have a meeting of the minds on a particular term of the plea, then it might be set aside. That seems to be what happened today. Sometimes, too, it's that the defendant either gets cold feet or there was a miscommunication between the defendant and the lawyer. The defendant has the right up until the time that they enter the plea to back out of it. So I've seen that happen, too. But this situation where it's really that the defense counsel and the prosecutor don't agree as to what the plea means, that's incredibly unusual. It makes me wonder whether there was some oral agreement or communications that happened outside of the plea where, you know, maybe the government wasn't willing to memorialize in the plea that it wasn't going to bring certain charges, but maybe it made some representation that it didn't presently intend to, or something else to defense counsel, and then somewhat walked that back.
Hunter Biden is a private citizen, and this was a personal matter for him. As we have said, the president, the first lady, they love their son, and they support him as he continues to rebuild his life. This case was handled independently, as all of you know, by the Justice Department under the leadership of a prosecutor appointed by the former president, President Trump.
Now remember, the United States it's all set to head into presidential election in 2024, which is why these developments will hold a massive bearing as far as Republicans and the Democrats are concerned. Let's try and get in a political perspective, and for that, let me introduce my guests. I'm joined in by Stephen Golub, who's a political commentator, also joined in by Jean Valentino, who's a conservative strategist. Many thanks to you, Stephen and Jean, for joining in. Stephen, if I could begin with you, in fact, Jean, let me take this question from you first. There's been much chatter about how Donald Trump's legal troubles are bound to affect his 2024 presidency plans. But how will Hunter Biden impact Joe Biden's presidential performance and re-election as well?
Well, for 2024, I think don't blink, you'll miss a chapter, as they say. It's very volatile and changing as we speak. So I think that President Biden's chances of getting reelected are fading. Keep an eye on Robert F. Kennedy Jr., whose numbers in the polls are coming up on the Democrat side. On the Republican side, there's 6 or 7 that have qualified for the Republican debates next week. And but still, Donald Trump stands over 50% ahead of the pack, with the closest one, Vivek Ramaswamy, at around 18 to 20%.
Right.
But you know, a lot of us find ourselves taking issues, taking on positions on issues without knowing all the facts. And I'm not accusing anybody here of not knowing the facts. But long before Donald Trump became president, his sons were involved in business deals all over the country, all over the world, excuse me. And as a result, they were brought in on depositions and interrogations for weeks in an attempt to try to catch them on something wrong. Their political campaign headquarters was wiretapped and spied upon. And you know, everyone's got a certain amount of wrongdoing here. Blame doesn't exist on one side alone. But to suggest that Donald Trump is spurring on this issue.
All right, Stephen, if I could bring you in on this bit. You heard what Gene has to say. He's saying that Joe Biden's presidency plans are in fact fading now. How do you see this in context to Hunter Biden's case?
I really don't think Hunter Biden's legal woes will impact Joe Biden's presidential performance or his chances of being reelected. This has been politically litigated so many times that it's kind of old news by now. The bigger news will be the prosecutions of Donald Trump, and the bigger news in the campaign will be foreign policy issues such as Ukraine, how the US economy is doing, so many other matters that are more substantive policy matters than what's going on with Hunter Biden. Yeah, if there are legal issues that affect the 2024 presidential campaign, it will not be Hunter Biden's legal issues and how they may directly impact Joe Biden. It'll be Donald Trump's very major legal issues, the trials against him and his possible convictions.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Many thanks to you, Stephen and Gene, for joining in on World 360.
I mean, there's two big questions in this world. What happens when we die and are we alone? And the Pentagon's talking about one of them right now. So it's interesting as hell. I mean, it is fascinating to think that, you know, maybe we're the ones in the ant farm. I don't think we're going to learn anything new as far as those of us that are interested in the subject. I just think it shows exposure. There's a couple whistleblowers. Well, there's three whistleblowers here today: 2 Navy pilots and an intelligence agent that are making some pretty interesting claims about that the United States has crashed retrieval, that we have down craft, crash craft, and alien bodies. And this guy handled the presidential daily briefing for years. So that's a big deal.
Welcome back to World 360. Here's the latest coming from Taiwan. Amid worries over a Chinese incursion, the Taiwan Army conducted a military drill at the Taiwan airport this week, which simulated an attack by China's PLA. According to reports, 6 helicopters and 180 soldiers took part in the exercise on the island. Remember, Beijing has been holding military exercises around Taiwan for months. The military aggression was sparked by trips of a high-level US official visiting the island earlier last year, which China claims is their breakaway province. And with that, let me bring you all the latest on Barbenheimer. The Barbie and Oppenheimer fever, which continues to rule at the box office. The Margot Robbie starrer Barbie, directed by Greta Gerwig and co-starring Ryan Gosling, has broken multiple records at the box office. It's the largest domestic opening of 2023 so far, drawing in approximately $162 million on its opening weekend. It's also the largest opening for a female-directed film in domestic markets, topping Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman. But on a global level, it's a second highest opening for a movie from a woman filmmaker, second to Captain Marvel. Then, Cillian Murphy starrer Oppenheimer, based on the father of the atomic bomb and the events that led up to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, and directed by Christopher Nolan, is sparking conversations about method acting, owing to the rumor of him skipping cast dinners and eating an almond instead. Robert Downey Jr.'s character role is also being lauded, and you'll have to watch it to understand why so. Let's try and understand this entire phenomena called Oppenheimer. And for that, let me introduce my guest. I'm joined in by Seth Schackner, who's the MD of Strat Americas, a digital business executive as well. Thank you so much, Seth, for joining in. Oppenheimer is more than just a meme now. It's become unequivocally the great box office performance for cinema goers. It's a full-fledged box office phenomenon. What explains such love for Barbie especially?
Yeah, I think it's enormous. It's interesting to hear some of the traditional retail and just traditional film marketing, techniques and programs being mentioned. I think that's a big part of it. And there's certainly a big product blitz. This is Mattel, so this is a major consumer products company. But I point out social media as increasingly one of the very biggest factors in breaking a picture, whether that's TikTok or other social media. And the activities that are coming from that, just the virality, if you will, that I think is probably in its own way creating network effects for people going into the theaters, awareness translating into theater going. I think all those things combined with the retail, social networking, just the general idea that people are aware of this, have kind of created a 1-2 punch to get people back into theaters. It's almost like it's an event where if you don't go to it, you have this sort of fear of missing out, if you will. So it's a lot of factors coming together, and maybe you won't see that going forward.
Thank you for sharing those inputs, Seth. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, Senate Minority Leader of United States, Mitch McConnell, stopped speaking in the middle of remarks at his regularly scheduled weekly news conference on Capitol Hill. He later clarified that he was fine, but the Minority Leader's health episode at the Capitol Hill has now intensified talks about a possible succession, a prospect that his colleagues have not seriously grappled with for years. Here's a look at that moment when McConnell froze. I'll leave you with these visuals. Thank you for watching.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're on a path to finishing the NDA this week. It's been good bipartisan cooperation and a string of
Okay, Mitch? Anything else you want to say, or should we just go back to your office? Do you want to say anything else to the press? Let's go back.
Go ahead, John.
I'll take it back. Let's go back to you.
Go ahead, John.